Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Selling Sanity podcast. This is the Savage edition because I am covering the Sean Combs The Reckoning documentary that is on Netflix and was executive produced by 50 Cent. A few things just off the bat, just to bring it to your attention. Number one, the whole documentary opens with Sean Combs having a phone call on speaker with his attorney, and it was recorded by a videographer. And I can tell you that I'm 99% sure that Sean Combs waived his attorney client privilege in that scene because when you speak directly to your lawyer, it has to be only between you and your lawyer in order for it to remain privileged. Someone else's presence destroys the privilege. So if a maid is in the hotel room cleaning up, or if a videographer is filming, the privilege, attorney-client privilege, is destroyed. So technically, that videographer could have leaked this a very long time ago to 50 Cent, and 50 Cent could have made it public because technically, like I said, because he waived the privilege, it could have been used much sooner. So I don't know if 50 Cent knows that. He probably consulted attorneys. But then the reason I say that is sometimes, you have an attorney client privilege that extends to third parties. So let's say you work at a law firm as a paralegal and you have to go into the conference room where Diddy and his lawyer are talking because you need to give them some papers. And as you walk over and you walk in, they don't stop talking. So you hear details about the case. Technically, that's still attorney-client privilege, even though a third party heard it, because the paralegal is an agent of the lawyer. And the conversation was taking place in preparation for or for the defense of litigation. But the videographer wasn't an agent of the attorney. That was an agent of Sean Combs. And they admit that the video wasn't being recorded for the purposes of preparing for litigation or defending litigation. They were taking the video for future documentary use. So there's no real reason why the videographer's presence doesn't destroy attorney-client privilege. So good on 50 for sitting on it as long as he did. But just so you guys, if there are any other rappers or any other musicians or actors, you know, making a documentary and you also have criminal charges pending, don't be that arrogant as to have an outside party witness your conversations with your attorney. Because number one, most likely you will be waiving the attorney-client privilege, which means at some point then your conversations with your attorney will become public. And as Diddy has now found out, how it becomes public and when it becomes public is not always in your control. So that's, one immediate takeaway from the documentary. But I really wanted to talk about in this episode Jennifer Lopez, because I just finished the third episode of the documentary series, and they only very briefly touched upon the 1999 shooting in New York where Shine and then Puffy were accused of firing guns inside of a crowded club after there was some kind of confrontation. And I distinctly remember this incident. I was 17 at the time, and I was also in the music industry to the extent that, I was always in the city, working on a demo because I used to sing, and I was always, going on A&R meetings and things like that. So I was kind of plugged in a little bit to the gossip part. We didn't call it tea back then, but I was always up and up on the tea. But there was an image that was published after the chase because paparazzi were there at the club when Diddy arrived, and so were obviously there when everyone was leaving. And there were paparazzi chasing the SUV that Diddy and Jennifer Lopez were being driven in. And one of the paparazzi guys got a picture of a woman's hand outside of the front passenger window, and the woman was dropping a gun or dropping an object. I'm pretty sure it looked like a gun in on the picture, but she was also the only person, the only woman in that car. So essentially, the paparazzi got evidence of Jennifer Lopez, you know, getting rid of evidence and just, throwing out a gun. She was arrested. According to her own lawyer, she was handcuffed to a bench at the precinct, and she was interviewed for about 10 hours, maybe more, before they finally released her. So Jennifer Lopez has her own mugshot. She's had her run in with the law, and I think very similar to the way that Rihanna distanced herself from Chris Brown for her career, because initially after their, domestic dispute where Chris Brown really assaulted her. But she went back to him initially, and then there was all this rumbling about her managers and her people basically telling her, look, you're going to destroy your career if you go back to this guy again. And I remember that in all you know, the Source and the Vibe magazine, like everybody was talking about this incident. And it was pretty well known in the industry that Jennifer Lopez's team was like, you are about to throw away your career if you stay with this guy, because you've thrown a damn gun out the window. You were handcuffed, processed, fingerprinted, got a mugshot, and there's a paparazzi picture of you throwing a gun out of the damn window. So you have to call this off. And so that's like right after the shooting incident is where they broke up. So I just thought it was very interesting because, 50 Cent, Curtis Jackson has given the world an early Christmas gift with this documentary. And it's interesting for me to see the number of times he being Diddy got away with so many, not just crimes, but he got away with violent crime. And I think that kind of gives you this like Teflon Don mentality. And for those who know, John Gotti was a mobster around the same time, I think. And they called him the Teflon Don because they always brought charges and none of them stuck. Diddy kind of reminds me of that, to the point where you can tell that like the lifestyle and the crime just became more and more elevated because he kept getting away with things. But the jury verdict in the U.S. Attorney's case with the Mann Act and prostitution and trafficking, the jury got the verdict wrong, and the U.S. Attorney's Office really messed up that case. I understand that Cassie was pregnant, but she should have been the last witness, not the first. The way to really prosecute that kind of case is to start with showing the structure of the organization, the protections that Diddy had around him, the methodology of payment for all the different things that he did, and how that payment funded a whole bunch of different criminal enterprises. And then you bring in evidence to show how he was like emotionally and mentally manipulative of people. And then you bring in Jane Doe, and then you bring in Cassie at the very end to say, as we've tracked through how his career has grown and how the profits from his business also went into funding criminal activity, this is the culmination of what that criminal activity resulted in. This woman was brainwashed, had battered women syndrome, and was forced to engage in prostitution acts. I know that the jurors were like, well, she wanted it. That's great. That's the perfect, sexual assault defense that every man in the history of trial has thrown out at some point, right? But here's the thing. For them to find Diddy guilty of transportation but not actual prostitution is the stupidest verdict ever, because basically what the jury said is that there was prostitution in the air. They were being transported for the purpose of prostitution, but as soon as they landed, it became poof, consensual, and nobody was a prostitute anymore. So there's like this magic flight where there are prostitutes in the air. And then poof, once you land, they're not prostitutes anymore. Even if you think Cassie wanted it, you can't say the same for the guy who was being transported as a product, not as a human being, across state lines for the purposes of engaging in an illegal sexual activity for profit. So the jury got this wrong. The U.S. Attorney's Office completely messed up. Now the documentary has revealed pretty substantial and compelling evidence that Diddy paid for and was an accessory after the fact with respect to the murder of Tupac Shakur. And since there's no statute of limitations on murder, I'm befuddled as to why the Las Vegas Police Department and the Las Vegas Prosecutor's Office haven't opened up an investigation given the amount of evidence that implicates Diddy, which kind of leads me to believe that Diddy might have been paying off prosecutors and cops and maybe even state judges. Honestly, Diddy may have paid off the U.S. Attorney's Office because the way that this case was handled was so, you know, amateurish that the Southern District of New York, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District, is like the creme de la creme, the cream of the crop. It's like Top Gun for prosecutors. And they bungled this case in a way that only got 50 months in jail plus time served. So I think there has been, or there have been, many miscarriages of justice. We have seen how the system fails victims. We have seen the way in which celebrity impacts the justice, that people are able to get. And we're also seeing through the documentary the cost of silence. If someone commits a crime against you, whether it's holding a bat over your head and forcing you to sign away 25% of a contract, 25% of a company that you are entitled to, and you're being forced to sign a contract, you then sign the contract and you go to the police. Because if you can establish immediacy in reporting the crime, you can get what you just signed to be invalidated. And I know it's hard for sexual assault victims to come forward immediately, but if you are ever, God forbid, the victim of a sexual assault, you have to go to a hospital. Your body is a crime scene. And I know that undergoing a rape kit can be a whole second traumatic experience. But if you don't do those things, if you don't do those steps, you are washing away evidence. You are washing away precious time. Time is your best friend when any act of violence or any kind of crime has been committed against you. You report immediately because the sooner in time you report a crime, then the more, credible you are and the easier and faster police are able to gather evidence. So there are a lot of lessons to take away from the Diddy documentary. But I did think it was interesting that they'd spent a lot of time on Cassie. And obviously she was, the person who was physically victimized in the most public way because of the hotel video that we saw. But I would have expected them to spend a little bit more time on the Jennifer Lopez relationship, and the fact that I didn't, I thought was interesting and I thought was worth calling out. So, because Jennifer Lopez would have been guilty of, being an accessory after the fact of a felony, because it's a felony to fire a firearm in a crowded room of people. And they had evidence, but they must have just, said, let's let her off the hook. She's a pop star, which is great, which is fine. I'm not saying, she should be in jail. But what I am saying is that the documentary let it slide, that Jennifer Lopez, had a several year relationship with Diddy that had her at white parties and that had her hand throwing a gun out a window right after the 1999 shooting, and those were details that were glossed over. So I thought that was interesting. So I have one episode left. Honestly, I've had to take this documentary in stages just because, as a Biggie fan and as a Tupac fan and as someone who listened to a lot of bad boy music over the years, I've had to process this a lot more slowly than I have had to process other documentaries. It's kind of like revisiting your life with a different lens and understanding that, oh yeah, I was bopping around to this while this man was beating his wife on the public street. Or, oh yeah, I was bopping along to this and this poor woman's being abused and, you know, treated like a sex slave for all intents and purposes, and kept drugged up enough so that she doesn't complain too much or is able to run away. So thank you, 50 Cent, for bringing this to light. I'm hopeful, but not optimistic that, any relevant, you know, federal or state prosecutors' offices are watching this and realizing that there are many other charges that can be brought against Sean Combs. And if Las Vegas had been doing their job, I mean, they should have been requesting any information that the feds gathered um, from the Diddy raids. They should have been, questioning witnesses. And if you're going to act on the confession of Keefe D during the proffer, then you really should be acting on going after the person who paid Keefe D for the murder and who solicited the murder and put the hit out. And that's Sean Diddy Combs. So hopefully we'll get some more justice before Diddy sees the light of day. And but I'm gonna go watch this last episode and then we'll see how it goes. Thanks for listening, guys. I'm Theresa. This is Selling Sanity, and I'll catch you on the next episode.